we had an industrial revolution, and we had a technological revolution, and whatever other revolutions we come to as time progresses. And we're going to have a hemp revolution at the same time, industry, through trade, through just jobs. It's going to make a huge difference. But farming as well. The deregulation of pot, I'm positive, will impact the further deregulation of hemp. And it's an incredible product that's been, or fiber that's been shelved for over 100 years because of its competition to cotton and pulp. But the new regulation on marijuana can't help but feed that market once again. I was listening to an radio article regarding Canadian hemp farmers saying under the current legislation, under current guidelines, hemp farmers in Canada can only harvest seed and stock. Everything else has to be destroyed, accounted for, weighed, the whole gamut, and destroyed. And yet Canada imports something like $34 million worth of CBD from Europe every year because we have a need for CBD. And the Canadian farmers are saying, why can't we do that? We're throwing it away. Let us further process our plants. We're growing it. And tap into that market as well. Like our farms, there's farm space, and crops are iffy.
So can you speak about your own experience? Like what's been your relationship to cannabis? Like when did you start growing? Like you've been doing it all your life? Did you just start the other day?
Oh goodness, no. I was a typical teenager, started smoking, grew a couple of plants because of that. Actually, I grew a plant for an ecology class in high school. Grew it right in the classroom.
Did you really?
Yeah, it was awesome. Wasn't allowed to keep it, but they let me grow one in the classroom. Just a little guy with the size. And it was purely recreational. I stopped smoking, stopped having much to do with it. When I was going to be a dad, I stopped drinking at the same time. But now in my, not senior years, but in my later years, once my children were grown, I guess, I found out my 17-year-old was smoking pot, and I said, you know what, I guess Dad's job is done. And I started back smoking again for the very obvious pain relief benefits that are attributed to it. And with that came, I have my hands in the dirt. I'm a farm kid. I've always had my hands in the dirt. So if I have my hands, if there's something in my life that can be grown, I'll grow it. Because that's where I need to be. And the value in growing your own, to me, is, I don't like the word control, but you can use the word control of what's in it. The soil composition, the lack of pesticide, the lack of commercial fertilizers, to keep it just essentially the plant that it's intended to be. So you're not smoking chemicals. It's horrendous. I like my ppms to be 0 if possible.
What's a ppm?
Parts per million of chemicals. I'd prefer them to be as close to 0 as possible, not these acceptable, safe levels, tolerance levels. Natural is best, as far as I'm concerned.
Have you grown up in this area, like around Belleville, Tyendinaga?
Not really. I've matured within a reasonable distance. Yes, I was from up north, about an hour away. Raised my family in Odessa. Mm-hmm. But country people, the territory's pretty big for us anyway.
Mm-hmm. And now, how many like, how many do you know a lot of your peers, a lot of people like you doing the same kind of thing, or having a similar relationship with the plant, or what do you sense in terms of how people feel about weed in regards to like whether they think it's a good thing or a bad thing, or are they involved in some way or another in this black market of it?
Well, it used to be a select group because it's illegal. So people were hush hush about who smoked and who didn't smoke, and you'd actually find out you knew somebody maybe for a year before you actually found out that they smoked because of the stigma surrounding it. That certainly over the last couple of years has freed up a lot with the discussions of decriminalization. More people freely admit that they smoke now. My personal circle has always been a very small circle. Anyway, and oddly enough, 9 out of 10 people that I associate with smoke and or grow and or know someone that grows for them. Again, it's a trust. It's to keep the natural plant natural. They trust their grower. That's pretty much my circle of people in that bunch. But they're earthy people anyway, and I'm an earthy person, so it kind of all fits.
Right.
I know lots of hippies that don't smoke weed, but I know lots of hippies but the people that aren't hippies that do, you know.
Like, first of all, how do you describe yourself, like your nationality or your identity, or?
Now there's a loaded question. My nationality's easy. I'm Canadian. 6th generation Irish Canadian, or sixth, maybe 7th by now generation Irish Canadian, early 1820s. But I was a typical kid growing up in Canada, in Canadian schools, with the amount of exposure that I had to be exposed to by my peers and my parents and so on. As we all do, of course, you get older and you start to grow and you start to think and you start to rethink what your belief system is. And I assume that has the potential to change is there every day. So your belief system can't be never on one straight, narrow path. I think I described to somebody once that I'm not a good joiner of things. Because if you join and commit to one thing, that limits your potential to look at other aspects of life too much. If what you joined has restrictions on it. So I just don't join. I just take part in the world around me. Things changed. My perceptions changed dramatically when I met Carrie. My wife, she's First Nations. Her outlook fit with my outlook, but from a different direction, from a different philosophy, from a different spiritual viewpoint, from all aspects of it. It was something I wasn't accustomed to. We're very, very, very much the same. I was born in a farming community, and like I said, I had my hands and toes in the dirt. I don't garden with shoes on. I garden barefoot, just to feel the soil. But she has brought so much more information to me that I didn't have access to before. That's let me again grow as a 50-year-old man, grow even further in or the potential for growth is there, the potential for change, or the potential for more deeper thought. I don't know how to describe it. It's not been an eye opener, but it has at times. That gets into a long discussion about education, but we don't need to go there. But who am I? I think I mentioned this to our friend once before. I'm disappointed in Canada, but I'm not First Nations. My family's been here a long time, but I'm still an immigrant-ish. I'm the child of immigrants, or the great-great-great-great-great-grandchild of immigrants. So my sense of belonging, I think, or identity rather, is more who I am right now and who I hope to continue to be. Again, I'm not a good joiner. I was brought up Canadian, so I was Canadian. If you look at it, I guess as an analogy to that, I was also brought up in the Christian church. But at a stage in my life, I began to realize how much hypocrisy there was in that. And it was actually completely against what they had taught me. So I had to distance myself from it, only because of my lack of conviction to that particular version of Christianity. Same thing, I can apply that as an analogy to being Canadian. You grow, obviously, from a child to adulthood and then on into older adulthood, whatever you want to call it. But if you don't close yourself off to ideas and don't close yourself off to the very real practical sense that you're allowed to change your mind, to make changes, to go a different direction at any point in time. We're all allowed to do all of that. That's just about where I am. I still don't know what I want. I'm 52 years old and I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. To a certain extent, that applies to my identity. My identity is a husband and a grandfather and a father and a tradesman, and everything else that I am. I'm a lot of things. And to put a label on my sense of identity or even my nationality or even my current national status is again a label that I'm not comfortable doing necessarily. But I did indicate to our friend once before, I'm just a guy that wants all of my neighbors to get along. I want harmony between my neighbors and harmony between my neighbors and myself. Like I said, I'm not First Nations, but my heart is with First Nations people, but my heart is with Canada. I don't necessarily agree with both sides completely, so I'm happy and I'm resolved to live between and help ensure that we survive, they survive, and the other they survive.
Do you consider it to be First Nations land? Like Canada to be First Nations land, or those, like say Ontario, where the Haudenosaunee would say we've never sold it to you. We said you could be here. We said you could put up some castles. You could plow to a depth of a plow, and we later said you could do some mining or you could do whatever. This was what Loran Thompson just said in a talk in Toronto the other day. That there was an agreement, to put monies in a trust fund, but then those monies haven't been paid out to the native peoples.
Well, the trust part is a bad one.
Yeah.
Whether it's a fund or whether it's a word or a treaty, the trust isn't there. Where are we? Shore to shore, we're on native land. The Canadian national anthem says it. I've always changed the words to it. I said our home on native land, not our home or home and native land. I've always said our home on native land. But it is our home. It's been established as our home for those who have come to this continent. But you have to A handshake is a handshake is a handshake is a handshake. If it's, I don't care if it's on paper. Paper doesn't mean anything. Um, so if you looked at it from just deed to land, it's owned by the First Nations people. Do they possess it? No, not all of it. They have occupancy of some of it. Have Europeans lived up to what? Yeah, let's take that away from have we, but have Europeans lived up to their end of the bargain? Not by a long shot. But yes, in some cases, but they're few and far between. So ownership, as far as ownership goes, it is what it is currently. But again, that can change.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's what's been your experience of seeing Tyendinaga go from one cannabis dispensary to, I believe the count is 10? How is that, has that impacted you in any way? Has it affected your, I don't know, your interests or those of your friends, or, you know, what's that been like as somebody who's connected to the cannabis industry or the cannabis plant?
I thought it was funny originally. I had these discussions a year and a half back, actually, about what I saw of what was going to happen. I think it's terrific, shops being open, and I think I've always thought that marijuana should be decriminalized, not legalized, but decriminalized. Leave alone. It should be sold as corn, like corn at the market. People that can grow it, grow it. The people that don't, go to the market and buy. So on res, when I saw shops starting to open, like I said, I thought it was comical. But comical from a standpoint of it's an illegal thing to do here in Canada, or out there in Canada, depending on where you're standing. However, Canada can't make up its mind. It's just starting to now, but it could not get a grasp on the laws surrounding what they were going to do to deregulate and to legalize cannabis. And then you throw the reservations into the mix. If Canada can't figure out its own shit in its own soil, how is it going to ever figure out what to do about that additional variable of its, okay, now this is on sovereign land that belongs to somebody else. We've told them they can have that land, and we can told them that we can police themselves to a certain extent. They can't make up the rules for themselves. It's going to be a long till they get that mess sorted out.
Who's they?
Canada, Canadian government, till they get the mess of their laws sorted out on Canadian soil. They have not a clue what to do on reservations because the dynamic is all totally different. That's what I found comical about it is the shops here on the res by numbers can open up and open up and open up just like the cigarette trade did. And if they don't have, if the res police don't have any concerns or concerns that are sufficient enough to shut them down, or laws in and amongst from the band that prohibit it, then as far as I'm concerned, they're free to do whatever they want to do. It's sovereign land. And like I said, Canada can't sort out its own rules. How's it going to figure out the rules that they want to decide to apply to the reservations? Because that's what they do. They make decisions on how they're going to apply the rules, laws, on reserve. And I still think it's funny. I still think it's comical that the shops are opening up more and more and more. It's a new industry. They've tried to kill the tobacco industry. Tobacco should have been freely traded between the different Mohawk territories, and yet it wasn't allowed to be because of whatever reasons the government came up with.
They passed that Bill C-10 legislation further criminalizing it.
Yeah. This is a whole new dynamic, and the government has the Canadian federal government has no idea how to deal with that.
Do you get a sense? Do you get a sense, like just from looking at it from the outside, how business is going for these dispensaries?
They're still open, and they continue to grow in numbers. Like in the last year, in the last year and a half, I first became aware of one. And then I became aware of the second one on the res being open. Now, 10 months later, there's 10 or 11 accounted for. The official number from the band, I think, was 11, wasn't it? Or was it 9? I don't know. Who knows? Who knows what's out on the territory, unless you drive around and look for them.
How many? One of the things that I guess we're talking about earlier was the impact on local, like non-native weed producers, people like yourself who are growing plants for themselves and then for some friends, or from like there's a. Or maybe you could just talk a little bit about how that the cannabis industry that you're familiar with works, and how has it been affected or impacted by the opening up of all of these stores?
Well, for me personally, I've primarily sourced weed from people I know, people that grew it, or I grew some myself. Now that's in recent years. It was typical before. You just bought weed where you bought weed where you bought weed. Wherever it was available, that's where you got it from. But it's not the same marijuana. And my peers, we've had discussions completely specifically about this, that our preference is still for outdoor marijuana. Occasionally you would get some of whatever version of what they call hydro or what they call indoor, or what it's marketed as when you get something in a baggie.
So break it down. What are those? What do those different categories mean?
Indoor is outdoor weed is outdoor weed.
Yeah.
It's now whether the person chooses to fertilize it chemically, fertilize it naturally, use natural pesticides, use chemical pesticides, all comes down to the individual. For the sale market, it's done as efficiently as possible. You want your crops to produce. So even outdoor weed for a large grower is chemicals through and through, pesticides and fertilizers.
And how many plants are these people normally doing, would you say?
100 to 200. Those are small. Those would be considered small grow operations. Outdoors, iffy. You have to fight with pollens. You have to keep your plants from getting pollinated, from turning into seed plants. The word of mouth was 2 miles from male plants or hemp plants, which is going to happen. It's going to happen. Hemp plants are going to destroy the outside market. Anyway, that's another thing. The outdoor market, as far as I'm concerned. Indoor weed was weed grown under lights, in dirt, in a soil medium. Whether it was a guy growing 2 plants for himself, or a factory, an old abandoned factory, or what was it, a beer?
Yeah, giant beer
facility that were growing inside. Yeah. And then there's hydro. Hydro's grown with water and no soil. And it's all liquid fed and chemical fed. My opinion on those is the taste and the smoke and the effects of it. I can taste plants that have chemical fertilizers in them, but I can taste a tomato that has chemical fertilizers in it. So my preference is the latter, to have no chemical fertilizers. But those are basically the three most usually common growing mediums for weed. Now what's changing in that is a lot of factors. There's a lot of factors. Some of them are ethnic factors. There's some ethnic business driving forces behind things that there always have been and always will be, that push it to be an indoor product that's completely full of chemicals but created in mass quantities for quick sale across a huge area. I have nothing to do with any part of that because that's not what I smoke.
So you're saying, like, so what percentage of the cannabis smoked in Ontario would you say is coming from those kind of grow ops?
Large grow ops, I would say.
But they're using chemicals and that are like kind of I guess it's almost like a factory model.
80%.
Right.
Probably 80%, because people aren't on the land. The cities are so heavily populated, and which just stands to reason that the smokers are in a greater number in cities. They can't do anything about it. They buy where they buy, and capitalism has taught us that you want to get the biggest bang for your buck that you can. So they want the highest THC that they can get, with a clean, to them anyway, a clean sense of what they're smoking, in the taste that they're getting. But they also get familiar with the taste and don't change it. I've got a real good friend of mine who had never smoked outdoor weed before and can't stand the taste of it. But it's just because their taste buds are accustomed to tasting pesticides and fertilizers. And I just find that bizarre.
So the so what's it been like what is the opening of the Tyendinaga weeds or cannabis dispensaries? How has that affected the local market?
What I can see, and I have limited access. I'm not a big guy. I just know a few people in this world. I'm not in a sales market. I'm not I'm not a dealer. I'm not any part of that. But from what I'm seeing from people that I do know, the industry here has actually made a big dent in what the market would be if you want to call it a market, off-res, for at least outdoor weed. Outdoor weed isn't as clean. It's not as greatly processed.
I guess you were telling me outdoor. You're telling me that you're going to be putting in less plants, or people that you know locally are growing less outdoor.
Yeah, it just comes down to supply and demand. Really, is all it has ended up to be. It comes down to supply and demand. The weed shops and marijuana shops on the reservation have opened up almost freely to potheads, anyway, to people that smoke. A new refreshed tobacco market. Canadians have been buying tobacco from reservations for years, when they could, because the price is better and people are cheap. When it comes to weed, it's the same sort of thing. It's a new novelty. There's a bunch of factors in it, obviously. It's a novelty. Mm-hmm. So you can slip over the border and break the law. Buy some weed, you look around, nobody's seeing, nobody's watching you, it seems to be okay, so you drive away. You'd never been busted for buying illegal cigarettes before, so why would there be a problem with weed? and that novelty, I think, has driven the market here. I don't know the numbers, but I bet you there's, like, for every native person, there's 10 Canadians that are buying from the shops.
There's also a sense of like they can actually they can learn more about the product, right? Or they can learn that there's all these different kinds of product, whereas in terms of different edibles or oils or different strands of cannabis that will have different effects. So it's almost like they feel almost like empowered consumers, as opposed to like going to a sketchy drug dealer's house. And
if that information's given to them, depends on where they go. If you're just buying weed for the sake of getting stoned, you don't care about that other ancillary stuff. If you, whatever depending on what your motivation is, we all like to learn, or most of us, some of us like to learn, and like to experience new things, and like to look at everything we can possibly look at that's going to be of some betterment to ourselves. If the education's there, for sure, there is a market, there is a segment of the population that will completely take advantage of the fact that it's open. It's free information now. You can actually get answers to your questions. You're not just getting an opinion from a stoner who heard it from a stoner. Now you get actual real facts, because it is getting to be much more fact-based.
Right.
Completely. Again, because of the open aspect of it. A lot of that, again, is coming from 2 years now of being told it's going to be legalized and deregulated. So again, the stigma has been broken. And that information can come out. And shops like the ones on the res, for sure, are just making that awareness much more prevalent.
But now, are you able to, like, are you benefiting from this, like, this new change in the industry? Like, is it a positive thing, or is it something that goes against your interests? Like, you were telling me you were having trouble selling things at the prices that you wanted, or the people at the stores that you went to on the reserve weren't, you weren't able to come to an agreement on an appropriate price.
Well, that's certainly there. That was more. It's not a big deal. I'm not a dealer. I've never been what I would class as a dealer. I have been a supplier. Someone needs something, you supply something. Primarily to people I know, only because I have the ability to grow. We're not all farmers, we're not all gardeners, we're not all herbalists. We all have different hats to wear. But what I've seen in general out in, and I can only speak for in Canada, and in a very select group of people who I've known for years that have grown and do sell quantity of weed here and there, is that pricing has been absolutely affected. Everybody, the standing joke now is everybody's got weed. There's not going to be a shortage. We're into almost June, and if anybody needs something to smoke, there's lots of it, because everybody has weed. Because there's lots of it. It just, even last year was funny, because last year was such a horrible famine in this part of not famine, what do you call it, drought in this part of the country. Terrible drought. I have friends that are sitting on 8 and 9 pounds of weed that they don't know what to do with, because it has almost no value. A buddy of mine selling weed for half what he did last year. And that's just what it is. And I think that is driven by the market that there is now. When you can drive to a shop and buy hydro or indoor weed that's been mechanically cleaned, so there's almost no leaf matter in it at all. So your brain goes to hey, that's all trichromes I'm buying. It's not vegetative matter and chlorophyll. I'm getting the most bang for my buck. That's what they buy. And when you can buy quarters for $40 of hydro that were 65 and 70 2 years ago or a year ago, absolutely, that market's going to be fed by pricing
What's the
and availability.
Right.
It's everywhere.
And what would you say the cost is for a grower like yourself in terms of producing a quarter for market?
I don't know how to put a dollar value on that. I grow all kinds of things. And when I grow, I feed myself. When I grow, I provide myself with my own medicine. And when I grow, I give away what I don't use. People need to eat. People need to feel better and be medicated. So I don't have a tangible, in my heart, I don't have a real tangible dollar value to even
So you're not
make
even
that equation.
You're not even engaging in a money based market.
Oh, money means nothing to me.
No, are you presumably then you have these mutually beneficial relationships with people where you give them something for free and they give you something for free. Is that happening or
that happens, but that still isn't even how I work.
Okay.
I'm more complicated than that. I give things without any expectation of anything in return. It's not a true trade. And my circle of friends are the same way. I'll have a buddy show up and throw a bag of weed on the table. Here, I brought you something. No expectation of a return. There's no dollars to be passed and forth. It's not come and renovate my house. It's here. But that could be the same thing with a dozen eggs or a basket of tomatoes or a quart of beans or strawberries or whatever. It doesn't have a tangible cost to it. So I'm a hard one to put a value on things other than what I know is in the market.
So have you been how long have you been living like that?
10 years. I would say 10 years. Kerry played a big part in that. That's where I always wanted to be. That's where my heart has always been. I've always been a giver. I've always been a volunteer. I've always been a
Provider?
first guy. Pardon?
A provider?
A provider, and a philanthropist. But my wife has brought that out in me to a much stronger sense.
I was going to say because what you're describing is like a very native way, right? Or
It is a very native way, and it's a very farm way. I was very small community, rural community, farmer, like I said, multiple generations. That's our philosophy. We nurtured the land. And I don't just say that. I actually had heard my great uncle, who was passing the farm on to my father, was asked one time what he'd been doing in his retirement, and all he said was taking care of the land. He didn't crop the land, he didn't have cattle on the land at that time, but he nurtured it and took care of it as best as he knew how. And that's where my wife and I believe we draw most of our mutual understanding from is what's inside us and what has created us and where we come from, to put us on that same path that we're on. You give because people need, and if there's need, then you just give. My personal philosophy is not to take back if you can help it.
You were telling me you kind of were thinking about where things were going to go a year and a half ago. Where do you think they're going to be in another year and a half, or in like what's your predictions?
Yeah, we started to talk about this the new cannabis revolution that I was talking about, and the hemp revolution. I'm not 100% sure what's going to happen with the government regulation. I don't necessarily completely agree how the government regulation is going, but they don't even really know what they're doing yet either. They throw little snippets at us every so often. There is money to be made for people who need to make money all across the spectrum. from selling cannabis to the byproducts that come from that, the edibles, the oils, the tinctures, the alcohol drinks that are out there, clothing, everything that can come from that. But not just marijuana is going to be finally open. Like I said, again, the stigma is going to be gone. But it's also going to, the deregulation of marijuana is going to further deregulate hemp. Hemp is a controlled product right now, still it's regulated. We were talking about this a little bit earlier, but there's acreage that has been, how can I describe this? Farms have changed. Small dairy farms are no longer. They've gotten to be larger commercial farms. But that opened up a lot of very good premium cropland. From my own personal experience, I saw my family land get sold for $4,000 an acre once the land was retired, because of the quality of the land that it was and because of the potential there for soybeans. Hemp is an incredible product. It's the second strongest fiber next to silk that we have, natural fiber next to silk, that we have available to us, and it's been stifled, and that is going to explode into an industry that's it has the potential to be bigger than oil, to be bigger than cotton, to be bigger than pulpwood. Just because it's so much easier to grow and to access. You don't have to wait 50 years for a tree to grow. You have one season you can grow the product, the fibers. Once they get a handle on it, the acreage is there for another new crop. Soybeans are iffy, depending on the year, depending on the market. But if you started filling up these fields with hemp and actually let the farmers get all of the benefits from all of the plant that they can, which only stands to reason you do that with every other plant going. They're not old growth, it's an annual renewable product.